The cruelest thing about regret is that it always arrives after the moment you needed the truth. The wind coming off the Atlantic carried the scent of salt and rain as I stood beneath a gray morning sky, staring at a polished granite headstone that shouldn't have existed. My hands were buried deep in the pockets of my coat, but they still wouldn't stop shaking. Around me, people spoke in hushed voices. Shoes pressed softly into damp grass. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell rang once, then faded into silence. None of it felt real. None of it felt possible. I kept staring at the name carved into the stone as if looking long enough might change it. As if the letters might rearrange themselves and undo everything that had happened. But they didn't. They remained exactly where they were, cold and permanent. A reminder of every mistake I had ever made. I swallowed hard and stepped closer. The bouquet in my hand suddenly felt heavier than it should have. Flowers were supposed to be for celebrations. Birthdays. Anniversaries. New beginnings. Not this. Never this. My chest tightened until breathing felt like work. The ocean waves crashed somewhere beyond the cemetery fence. Steady. Unbothered. The world kept moving even when yours stopped. Funny how that worked. I lowered the flowers carefully and stared down at them for a long moment. White lilies. Her favorite. I knew that now. There were so many things I knew now. Things I should have known years ago. Things I would have given anything to learn before it was too late. A gust of wind tugged at my coat. I closed my eyes for a second. Just 1 second. But it was enough. Enough to hear her laugh in my memory. Enough to remember a smile that used to appear whenever she pushed a loose strand of blonde hair behind her ear. Enough to remember the life I could have had if I hadn't been so certain I was right. The memory hit like a wave. Sharp. Immediate. Unavoidable. 4 years. 4 years had disappeared because of one sentence. One sentence spoken in anger and pride. One sentence I would hear for the rest of my life. That baby isn't mine. I opened my eyes again and looked down at the headstone. My throat burned. Back. Then I thought I was protecting myself from betrayal. I thought I was refusing to become the fool everyone expected me to become. Instead, I became something worse. A man who walked away. A man who never asked enough questions. A man who never noticed what he was losing until it was gone. My phone vibrated inside my pocket. I ignored it. Nothing mattered right now. Not meetings. Not business. Not power. Not the empire I had spent years building. None of it could change what stood in front of me. Then I heard a small voice somewhere behind me. A child's voice. Soft. Curious. Innocent. The sound made my heart stop. Because even before I turned around, I somehow knew exactly who it belonged to. Before we continue, if you enjoy emotional mafia romance stories about love, regret, second chances, and the families we almost lose, please subscribe to the channel, like this video, and share it with someone who believes that one mistake should never define an entire lifetime. Now let's continue. For a second I could not move. The voice was small, soft, and familiar in a way that made my chest ache. I turned slowly and saw a little boy standing a few yards away beside an older woman. His blonde hair stirred in the wind coming off the water. His hands were buried inside the pockets of a blue jacket that looked slightly too big for him. But it was not the jacket that stole the air from my lungs. It was his eyes. They were my eyes. The same shade. The same shape. The same way they narrowed when he was trying to understand something. The older woman rested a gentle hand on his shoulder. Her face carried the exhaustion of someone who had spent years holding a family together through storms nobody else could see. Owen looked at me with innocent curiosity. He was too young to understand why my hands trembled. Too young to understand why I suddenly felt as though the ground beneath me had disappeared. He tilted his head slightly. Mom said people visit graves because love does not disappear. The words hit me harder than any accusation ever could. I swallowed. My throat felt tight. She told you that? He nodded. She said people leave but love stays. For a moment neither of us spoke. The ocean wind filled the silence. Somewhere overhead, gulls cried against the gray sky. The older woman gently squeezed Owen's shoulder. Your mother used to bring him here every Sunday, she said quietly. I looked at her. You knew Meredith? Her expression softened. Everybody knew Meredith in Cedar Bay. My gaze drifted back to Owen. 4 years. 4 years of birthdays. 4 years of scraped knees, school pictures, bedtime stories, and first words. For years I had missed. The realization settled over me like a weight I could never remove. Owen stepped closer. Are you Rowan? My heartbeat stumbled. Yes. He looked down at his shoes before looking back up again. Mom talked about you. The cemetery seemed to disappear around me. She did. He nodded slowly. She said you were stubborn. Despite everything, a painful laugh escaped my throat. That sounded exactly like Meredith. The older woman smiled faintly. She never wanted him to hate you. After everything? She nodded. Especially after everything. Shame washed through me. Meredith had every reason to turn him against me. Every reason to tell him I had abandoned them. Every reason to erase me completely. Instead, she had protected the image of a man who had not earned it. Owen shifted closer until he stood only a few feet away. Mom said everybody gets a second chance if they are brave enough to take it. I closed my eyes for a second, because 3 weeks earlier, before the hospital visits, before the diagnosis, before everything started falling apart, Meredith Hale had been sitting alone in a small examination room holding a sheet of paper that changed the course of all our lives. And when the doctor quietly told her how little time she might have left, the first thing she asked was not about herself. It was about her son. The fluorescent lights above Meredith buzzed softly, filling the small examination room with a sound she would remember for the rest of her life. The paper on the examination table crinkled as she shifted her weight, but she barely noticed. Her eyes remained fixed on the doctor sitting across from her. He was speaking carefully, choosing each word with the kind of caution people use when there is no good way to deliver bad news. The folder in his hands looked ordinary. Beige. Thin. Harmless. Yet somehow it contained enough information to divide her life into before and after. Meredith listened without interrupting. She had spent years helping children at the library navigate difficult emotions. She knew how to remain calm when everything inside her wanted to panic. But this was different. The room felt smaller with every sentence. The clock on the wall seemed louder. Time itself suddenly felt expensive. When the doctor finally stopped talking, silence settled between them. He waited for questions. Most people asked about treatments, about odds, about specialists, about miracles. Meredith stared at the floor for several seconds before lifting her eyes. My son is 4, she said quietly. The doctor nodded. She swallowed hard. If something happens to me, what should I do to prepare him? The question caught him off guard. She could see it in his face. He had expected fear, denial, anger. Instead, she was thinking about Owen. Only Owen. The doctor leaned forward gently. You still have time. Meredith glanced toward the window. Outside, Cedar Bay carried on as if nothing had changed. Cars moved through intersections. People carried groceries. Someone walked a dog along the sidewalk. The world continued. Yet hers had tilted completely. How much? She asked. The doctor hesitated. That hesitation told her everything before he answered. When she finally left the clinic, the afternoon air felt colder than it should have. She stood beside her aging sedan for nearly 5 minutes without starting the engine. Her hands rested on the steering wheel. Her eyes burned, but she refused to cry. Not yet. Owen would be waiting at home. Owen would want to show her whatever drawing he had made that day. Owen would ask what they were having for dinner. Owen would tell her about the seagull he named Captain. Life would continue because children do not stop needing their parents simply because tragedy arrives. By the time she reached their small coastal house, she had forced a smile onto her face. The front door burst open before she could even grab her purse. Owen raced across the porch wearing mismatched socks and superhero pajamas. Mom! He shouted. She dropped to one knee and wrapped her arms around him. For a second she held him tighter than usual. Much tighter. Owen pulled back with a puzzled expression. You okay? Meredith smiled. Of course. He accepted the answer immediately. Children trust love. That was the beautiful thing about them. Later that evening, after dinner and bath time and 2 bedtime stories, Owen curled beneath his blanket and looked up at her. The small lamp beside his bed cast a warm glow across the room. Mom? He asked softly. Yes. His blue eyes searched hers. Who is my dad? Meredith felt her heart stop, because for 4 years she had prepared herself for every difficult question except that one. The question lingered in the room long after Owen asked it. Meredith sat on the edge of his bed while the lamp cast soft golden light across the blankets. Outside, the wind rattled the branches of the old maple tree beside the house. Normally the sound comforted her. Tonight it felt like a countdown. Owen waited patiently. Children had a remarkable ability to sit with silence when they sensed something important was coming. Meredith looked at her son and saw pieces of 2 lives woven together. His smile was hers. His eyes were Rowan's. For years she had convinced herself there would be more time. More time to explain. More time to figure out the right words. More time to protect him from complicated truths. Now time felt fragile. "Your dad is someone who made a mistake," she said carefully. Owen frowned. "A big mistake?" Meredith managed a small smile. "A very big one." He considered that answer seriously. Did he stop loving us? The innocence of the question nearly broke her. Because children always assumed love was the reason people stayed or left. They did not yet understand pride, fear, regret. Meredith brushed a hand through Owen's hair. Sometimes people make decisions because they are scared, not because they do not care. Owen stared at the ceiling for a moment. "Is he nice?" Meredith laughed softly through the ache in her chest. "Sometimes." "Is he funny?" "Not as funny as he thinks he is." Owen grinned. "Then maybe I got my jokes from you." She kissed his forehead. "Definitely from me." He yawned. The conversation seemed finished. Meredith hoped it was. But then he turned toward her again. "Do you think I will ever meet him?" The room suddenly felt too small. She looked away before answering. "Maybe." It was not a lie. It was not the truth either. It was the only word she could manage. A few minutes later, Owen drifted to sleep clutching the stuffed lighthouse toy he had carried everywhere since preschool. Meredith remained beside the bed long after his breathing became steady. She watched him sleep, memorizing everything. The curve of his cheek, the way his hand curled beneath his chin, the faint freckles across his nose. Details most parents took for granted because they assumed tomorrow would come. Eventually she rose and quietly left the room. The house felt empty without Owen's voice filling it. In the kitchen, she opened a drawer and pulled out an old plastic storage box. The edges were worn from years of use. Inside sat photographs, birthday cards, and a faded library card she had carried since college. Beneath them rested something she had not touched in 4 years. A photograph of Rowan. Her thumb traced the edge of the picture. He looked younger there. Less guarded. Less tired. She remembered the man she had fallen in love with. The man who could spend hours listening to her dreams. The man who once promised her she would never face life alone. Then she remembered the day everything shattered. The disbelief in his eyes. The distance in his voice. The silence that followed. Meredith closed her eyes. For years had passed, yet the memory still hurt. Slowly she placed the photograph back inside the box. Then she pulled out a notebook and a small video camera she had borrowed from a friend. The realization settled over her with heartbreaking clarity. If she could not guarantee more time, she would leave behind pieces of herself. Messages, stories, advice, love, enough to follow Owen through every milestone she might miss. Her hands trembled as she turned on the camera. The small red recording light blinked to life. Meredith stared into the lens for several seconds before whispering her first words. Isuadhart. If you are watching this someday, it means there is something I need you to know. The red recording light seemed impossibly bright in the darkness of the kitchen. Meredith stared at it for several seconds, trying to imagine a future version of Owen watching these videos years from now. Maybe on a laptop. Maybe on a phone. Maybe in a dorm room hundreds of miles from Cedar Bay. The thought made her smile and ache at the same time. She took a slow breath. "Today you are 4 years old," she said softly into the camera. "You still leave your shoes in the hallway even though I ask you not to. You still think pancakes count as dinner. And you still believe every seagull at the harbor knows your name." A small laugh escaped her. For a moment she forgot the diagnosis. Forgot the fear. Forgot the uncertainty hanging over every tomorrow. She was simply a mother talking to her son. When she finally stopped recording, nearly an hour had passed. The clock on the stove read 12:17 a.m. She saved the file carefully and wrote a label across a small envelope. For Owen. Age 10. Her hand trembled slightly as she set it aside. The next morning arrived too quickly. Sunlight filtered through the curtains while the smell of coffee filled the kitchen. Owen sat at the table drawing a pirate ship with markers. "Mom," he announced proudly, "Captain the Seagull has a boat now." Meredith glanced at the picture. "Of course he does. And he has treasure." "Naturally." Owen nodded seriously. "A lot of treasure." Meredith laughed. The sound surprised even her. Felt good. Normal. For the next few hours they followed their usual routine. She walked him to preschool. Waved goodbye. Smiled until he disappeared through the doors. Then she sat in her car and cried for the first time since leaving the doctor's office. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just silent tears rolling down her cheeks while she gripped the steering wheel. She allowed herself exactly 5 minutes. Then she wiped her eyes and drove to the library. Because life kept moving. The library sat near the harbor. Modest brick building that smelled faintly of books and sea air. Meredith loved it there. The familiar shelves. The quiet conversations. The children who raced toward story hour every Thursday afternoon. It felt like a place where hope lived. Around noon, her friend and coworker Dana appeared carrying 2 cups of coffee. "You look tired," Dana said. Meredith forced a smile. Single mom. Occupational hazard. Dana studied her for a second longer than usual. "Are you sure that is all it is?" Meredith looked away. She had not told anyone yet. Not even Dana. The words felt too real if spoken aloud. Before she could answer, a group of children burst through the front doors laughing about something that had happened at school. The moment passed. Meredith returned to work. But throughout the day, she kept noticing little things. A child returning an overdue book. An elderly man reading by the window. A mother helping her daughter sound out difficult words. Ordinary moments. Beautiful moments. Moments people rarely appreciated because they assumed there would always be more. That evening, as she locked the front doors, her phone buzzed with a reminder from the hospital. Another appointment. Another test. Another conversation she did not want to have. Meredith slipped the phone back into her purse and looked out toward the harbor. The sun was sinking into the water, painting the sky gold and orange. For a brief second, everything looked peaceful. Then a black luxury SUV pulled into a parking space across the street. Meredith barely noticed it. She turned and walked toward her car. She never saw the man sitting behind the tinted window glance up from a file, freeze when he spotted her, and whisper her name for the first time in 4 years. Rowan Mercer had spent years training himself not to react. Boardrooms. Negotiations. Crises. He had built an entire life around control. Yet the moment he saw Meredith crossing the street toward her car, every ounce of that control disappeared. For several seconds he simply sat behind the wheel staring through the windshield. The late afternoon sunlight caught her hair as the ocean breeze pushed it across her shoulder. She looked different, older, more tired, but unmistakably Meredith. His chest tightened with a feeling he could not immediately name. Relief. Shock. Guilt. Maybe all 3. 4 years. 4 years without a phone call. 4 years without a single explanation. He had searched in the beginning. Not publicly. Not obsessively. Just enough to convince himself she wanted nothing to do with him. Eventually work filled the empty spaces. Success filled the silence. Or at least he had pretended it did. Across the street Meredith unlocked her car and slid into the driver's seat. Rowan watched her drive away before he realized he was gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles had turned white. His phone rang. He ignored it. Then it rang again. And again. Finally he answered. "What?" His cousin Grant sounded irritated. "The meeting starts in 20 minutes. Rowan looked toward the road where Meredith had disappeared. "Reschedule it." Silence. "You do not reschedule meetings like this." Rowan ended the call without responding. For the first time in years, business felt completely irrelevant. Meanwhile, Meredith drove home with the radio playing softly in the background. She barely heard it. Her thoughts kept returning to the camera sitting on her kitchen counter, to the growing stack of recordings hidden inside the closet, to all the things she still needed to say. By the time she reached home, Owen was already waiting on the porch with Dana. The little boy waved enthusiastically the moment he saw her car. "Mom, guess what happened?" Meredith stepped out smiling. "What happened?" Owen raced forward. "I lost my library card and then found it again." Meredith laughed. "That is exciting." "It was a very stressful 10 minutes. Dana shook her head. "He inherited your dramatic side." Meredith smiled, but something in her chest suddenly felt strange. A sharp wave of dizziness swept over her. She grabbed the car door briefly until it passed. Neither Owen nor Dana seemed to notice. Thank goodness. The last thing she wanted was concern. That night, after Owen fell asleep, Meredith recorded another video. This one was labeled age 16. She talked about first heartbreaks, about mistakes, about kindness, about choosing people who made life brighter rather than heavier. Halfway through the recording, she stopped and wiped away unexpected tears. The future she described might be one she never witnessed. Across town, Rowan sat alone inside a hotel room overlooking the harbor. Papers covered the table in front of him. Property records, employment history, public information, everything he could find about Meredith Hale. Most of it was ordinary. Library employee, Cedar Bay resident, community volunteer. Then his eyes landed on a photograph attached to a local newspaper article. Meredith stood beside a group of children during a summer reading event. A small blonde boy stood next to her holding her hand. Rowan froze. Something about the child felt familiar. Pamphili familiar. He picked up the photograph and stared at it for a long time. Then he noticed the eyes. His eyes. And for the first time, a question he had buried 4 years ago returned with terrifying force. The photograph refused to leave Rowan's hands. Long after midnight, he remained seated beside the hotel window overlooking Cedar Bay Harbor, staring at the image until the edges began to blur. The little boy in the picture was smiling at something outside the frame. A normal smile. A happy smile. Yet Rowan could not stop looking at the eyes. His eyes. The same color. The same shape. Even the way the child tilted his head felt strangely familiar. Coincidence, he told himself. It had to be. Thousands of children had blue eyes. Thousands of children looked like someone else. But deep down, a quiet voice he had spent years ignoring had already begun whispering a different possibility. He reached for his phone and opened the image again. Then he zoomed in. The feeling only grew stronger. Across town, Meredith sat at her kitchen table sorting through envelopes. The stack had grown larger over the past week. Labels covered each one in careful handwriting. Age 8. Age 12. High school graduation. First heartbreak. Wedding day. She hated writing those words. Each label felt like admitting defeat. Yet she continued because the alternative was leaving Owen without answers. Without pieces of her. A sudden laugh echoed from the living room. Meredith looked up and found Owen sprawled across the carpet building an elaborate fort from couch cushions. "Mom," he announced proudly. "Captain the Seagull has opened a hotel." Meredith smiled. "A hotel? For tired birds. That sounds very thoughtful." Owen nodded seriously. Everybody needs somewhere safe. The word struck her harder than he could possibly know. Everybody needs somewhere safe. She looked at her son and wondered how much longer she would be able to provide that safety herself. The thought followed her throughout the evening. By the time she tucked him into bed, exhaustion weighed heavily on her shoulders. But sleep did not come easily. Meanwhile, Rowan spent the next morning doing something he had not done in years. He walked. No assistants. No drivers. No schedule. Just a quiet walk through Cedar Bay. The town felt different from the cities he usually inhabited. Smaller. Slower. More human. People greeted one another by name. Shop owners chatted on sidewalks. Children rode bicycles near the harbor. It felt like the kind of place people came to heal. Around noon, Rowan found himself standing outside the public library. The brick building looked exactly like the photograph. Through the front windows he could see bookshelves and reading tables. For several seconds he considered walking inside. Then common sense intervened. What exactly would he say? "Hello, Meredith. I disappeared from your life 4 years ago and now I think that little boy might be mine." The thought sounded ridiculous even in his own head. He turned to leave. That was when the front door opened. A group of preschool children spilled onto the sidewalk, laughing and carrying paper crafts. Rowan stepped aside automatically. Then he saw him. The boy from the photograph. Owen. The child walked carefully beside Meredith, holding her hand while balancing a cardboard lighthouse in his other arm. Rowan froze. The world seemed to narrow until only the three of them existed. Meredith was smiling at something Owen had said. A genuine smile. One Rowan had not seen in years. Then Owen looked up. Their eyes met. The boy paused. For one strange second. Neither moved. Rowan could not explain why his chest tightened. He was looking at a complete stranger. Yet something felt painfully familiar. Meredith followed Owen's gaze. Her smile vanished instantly. The cardboard lighthouse slipped from Owen's hands and landed softly on the sidewalk. Because for the first time in 4 years, Meredith and Rowan were staring directly at each other. For a moment nobody moved. The sounds of Cedar Bay continued around them as if nothing extraordinary had happened. A truck rolled past. A gull cried overhead. One of the preschool teachers laughed at something a child said. Yet Meredith felt completely frozen. 4 years collapsed into a single heartbeat. Rowan stood across the sidewalk looking exactly as she remembered and nothing like she remembered at the same time. The sharp confidence was still there. The quiet intensity. But there was something else now. Weariness. Regret. The kind of sadness people carried when they had spent too long living with unanswered questions. Owen looked from one adult to the other, sensing a tension he could not understand. "Mom?" he asked softly. Meredith forced herself to breathe. "Pick up your lighthouse, sweetheart." Owen obeyed immediately, crouching to retrieve the cardboard project. Rowan never took his eyes off Meredith. "Hello, Meredith." Her name sounded strange coming from him after so many years. Familiar and foreign at the same time. She swallowed hard. "What are you doing here?" Rowan hesitated. The honest answer sounded impossible even inside his own head, because he did not really know. He had come to Cedar Bay for a business matter 3 days ago. Then he saw her. Then he saw the photograph. Then he saw Owen. And now nothing made sense anymore. "I wanted to talk." Meredith laughed once. A short, humorless sound. 4 years later? Rowan flinched. The reaction was small, but she noticed it. For some reason that only made everything hurt more. Owen stepped closer to Meredith's side. "Mom, who is he?" The question landed like a stone dropped into still water. Rowan felt his pulse quicken. Meredith looked down at her son, then back at Rowan. The silence stretched longer than it should have. Finally she answered. "An old friend." Rowan lowered his eyes. Friend. He supposed that was kinder than he deserved. Owen seemed satisfied by the explanation. Children often accepted answers adults struggled with. The preschool group continued moving toward the park across the street. One of the teachers called for Owen. "Come on, buddy. We are feeding the ducks." Owen brightened instantly. "Can I go?" Meredith nodded. "Stay where I can see you." Seconds later he was running after the other children. Rowan watched him disappear toward the waterfront. The resemblance was even harder to ignore in motion. The way he ran. The way he smiled. Meredith folded her arms. "Say what you came to say." Rowan looked back at her. There were 100 questions he wanted to ask. 100 accusations he had rehearsed years ago. Yet standing here now, none of them seemed important. "Are you okay?" Meredith stared at him in disbelief. "That is your question?" Rowan noticed how pale she looked. The shadows beneath her eyes. The exhaustion hidden behind her smile. Something was wrong. Deeply wrong. He could feel it. Meredith shook her head. "You do not get to ask that anymore." The words were quiet. They hurt anyway. Rowan opened his mouth to respond, but his phone began vibrating inside his pocket. He ignored it. Then it vibrated again. And again. Finally he pulled it out. A message from his private investigator filled the screen. DNA analysis completed. Results attached. Rowan's stomach dropped. His eyes locked on the notification. Meredith saw the color drain from his face. And somehow before he even opened the file, she knew exactly what he was about to learn. Rowan could hear his own heartbeat as he stared at the notification on his screen. The harbor, the children, the gulls overhead. All of it seemed to fade into the background. Only those 4 words remained. DNA analysis completed. His thumb hovered over the attachment. Suddenly he was terrified to open it. Because once he knew the truth, there would be no hiding from it. No pretending. No excuses. Meredith watched him carefully. She recognized that expression. 4 years ago she had seen certainty in his eyes. Now, she saw fear. Real fear. The kind that comes when a person realizes their entire understanding of the past may have been wrong. Rowan opened the file. His eyes scanned the report once. Then twice. Then a third time. The words did not change. Probability of paternity. 99.99%. The world tilted beneath him. He looked toward the park where Owen was feeding ducks with the other children. The little boy laughed as one waddled too close to his sneakers. Rowan felt something crack open inside his chest. 4 years. 4 years of missed birthdays. 4 years of first words. 4 years of scraped knees, bedtime stories, Christmas mornings, and ordinary moments that fathers spend a lifetime remembering. 4 years stolen by a mistake he had made with his own hands. Slowly he lowered the phone. Meredith already knew. He could tell by the sadness in her eyes. Why? He whispered. The question carried years of regret behind it. Meredith looked away toward the water. You already know why. Rowan closed his eyes briefly. He did know. He remembered every detail of that terrible day. The argument. The accusations. The anger he had mistaken for certainty. He remembered watching her leave. He remembered convincing himself he was protecting his future. Instead he had destroyed it. I was wrong, he said quietly. Meredith laughed once. Not because anything was funny. Because the statement was so painfully inadequate. Yes, she replied. You were. Neither spoke for several seconds. Then Rowan looked back at Owen. Does he know? Meredith followed his gaze. Not Owen swallowed. And you never told me. The hurt in his voice surprised even him. Meredith turned toward him. For the first time since seeing him again, anger flashed across her face. I tried. Rowan froze. What? I tried. Her voice trembled. Twice. Confusion filled his expression. Meredith took a shaky breath. I wrote letters. I called. Your assistant said you were unavailable. Then after what happened, I stopped believing you wanted to know. Rowan stared at her in disbelief. Because it sounded exactly like something that could have happened during the chaotic years when his life revolved around expansion, meetings, and endless obligations. Countless messages crossed his desk back then. Countless calls never reached him. A terrible possibility began forming in his mind. What if she had tried? What if he had never even seen those attempts? Before he could respond, Meredith suddenly swayed. It was subtle, barely noticeable, but Rowan saw it immediately. Her hand reached for the nearby railing. Color drained from her face. Meredith. She forced a smile. I am fine. Rowan knew she was lying. The same instinct that once knew every expression on her face returned all at once. Something was wrong. More wrong than he realized. Then his phone vibrated again. A second message appeared beneath the DNA report. Additional medical records located. Urgent. Rowan opened the attachment. The first line stole the breath from his lungs. The words on the screen refused to make sense. Rowan read them once. Then again. Then a third time. Each pass only made them more real. Medical prognosis. Advanced condition. Limited time. Estimated weeks, not years. The harbor seemed to spin around him. Meredith was still standing a few feet away, one hand resting lightly against the railing as though she suddenly needed the support. She knew exactly what he had just read. He could see it in her eyes. Not fear. Not panic. Acceptance. Somehow that hurt even more. Rowan lowered the phone slowly. 4 years he had imagined finding Meredith again. He had imagined arguments, explanations, maybe even forgiveness someday. He had never imagined this. How long? He asked quietly. Meredith looked toward the water. The sunlight danced across the waves, indifferent to human heartbreak. A few weeks. Maybe a little more if I am lucky. Rowan felt sick. And you were never going to tell me? Meredith laughed softly. There was no humor in it. Tell you what exactly? That you had a son? I tried. That I was sick? Why would I? Rowan opened his mouth but no words came. She was right. Every answer sounded selfish. Every defense sounded empty. In the distance, Owen ran after a flock of ducks, laughing as they scattered across the grass. The sound cut straight through Rowan's chest. His son. The words still felt impossible. His son. And now the woman who had raised that child alone was talking about time as though it were running out by the hour. Does Owen know? Rowan asked. Meredith shook her head immediately. No, you should tell him. Pain flashed across her face. He is 4 years old. Rowan looked away. She was right again. 4-year-olds worried about cartoons and toy lighthouses and whether seagulls needed hotels. They were not supposed to carry burdens like this. Meredith took a slow breath. Every day I wake up and try to make things feel normal for him. Her voice grew quieter. I make breakfast. I walk him to school. I read him stories. Then I go into another room and record videos because I do not know how many chances I have left. Rowan stared at her. Videos. She nodded. For future birthdays. Future milestones. Rowan closed his eyes briefly. The image nearly destroyed him. Meredith sitting alone night after night, talking to a camera because she was preparing for a future she might never see. A future he should have been helping build. You should not have had to do that alone, he whispered. Meredith looked at him for a long moment. No, she said softly. I should not have. The honesty of the statement hurt more than anger ever could. A cold breeze rolled in from the harbor. Owen waved excitedly from across the park. Meredith immediately smiled and waved back. The transformation was instant. Whatever pain she carried disappeared the second her son looked her way. Rowan noticed it. He noticed everything now. The exhaustion hidden behind her smile. The careful way she conserved energy. The moments she thought nobody was watching. And suddenly one thing became crystal clear. Whatever business had brought him to Cedar Bay no longer mattered. The meetings. The contracts. The empire. None of it mattered. Only this mattered. Only Meredith. Only Owen. Only the time that remained. Then Owen came running toward them holding something in his hand. Mom, he shouted. Look what I found. Neither adult was prepared for what happened next. Owen skidded to a stop in front of them, breathing hard from excitement. In his small hand was a smooth, gray stone shaped almost perfectly like a heart. Look, he said proudly. I found it by the water. Meredith smiled instantly. That is beautiful. Owen held it up toward Rowan. Do you think it is lucky? Rowan stared at the stone for a second before answering. I think it might be. Owen grinned and slipped it carefully into his pocket as though it were treasure. Then he looked between the two adults again. Children noticed more than people realized. Why are you both sad? The question landed softly but carried enormous weight. Meredith immediately crouched beside him. We are just talking about grown-up things. Owen considered that explanation. Grown-up things seem exhausting. Despite everything, Rowan laughed. A real laugh. The first one he had felt in longer than he could remember. Owen pointed at him. See? You can smile. Rowan blinked. Was I not smiling before? No, Owen shook his head. You looked like somebody stole your ice cream. Meredith covered her mouth to hide a smile. For a brief moment, the heaviness surrounding them lifted. Then Owen spotted a small sailboat moving across the harbor. Can I go watch? Meredith nodded. Stay where I can see you. The little boy ran off again, leaving silence behind. Rowan watched him disappear toward the railing. Every instinct inside him wanted to follow, to memorize every laugh, every expression, every second he had missed. Meredith slowly stood. The effort seemed to cost her more than it should have. Rowan noticed. You are tired. I am fine. Meredith. She closed her eyes briefly. Please stop asking if I am fine. The words came out softer than he expected. More exhausted than angry. Rowan nodded. Okay. Another silence settled between them. The harbor breeze carried the scent of salt and distant rain. Finally Rowan spoke again. What do you need? Meredith looked genuinely confused. What? What do you need right now? She stared at him as though nobody had asked her that question in years. Maybe nobody had. Single parents became experts at surviving, at solving problems alone, at carrying impossible weight without complaint. Meredith looked toward Owen. I need him to be okay. Rowan swallowed. He will be. Meredith shook her head. You cannot promise that. I can try. She studied him carefully. For the first time since their reunion, she seemed to see something other than the man who had hurt her. Not forgiveness. Not trust. Just possibility. A tiny crack in the wall between them. Then her phone rang. She glanced at the screen. The color immediately drained from her face. Rowan saw it happen. What is it? Meredith hesitated. The hospital. Rowan felt his stomach tighten. She answered after the third ring. He could hear only fragments of the conversation. Appointment. Results. Tomorrow morning. Important. By the time the call ended, Meredith looked even paler than before. She slipped the phone back into her purse. Rowan already knew the answer before asking. Something changed. Meredith nodded slowly. The harbor suddenly felt colder. Owen continued chasing seagulls, completely unaware that his world might be shifting beneath his feet. Rowan looked at his son, then back at Meredith, and for the first time a terrifying thought entered his mind. What if they did not have weeks left? What if they had far less than that? The next morning arrived wrapped in gray clouds and ocean fog. Meredith sat in the passenger seat staring out the window while Rowan drove toward the hospital. Neither of them had spoken much during the 20-minute trip. Some silences were uncomfortable. This one felt heavy. Necessary. Owen was at preschool with Dana, happily unaware that two adults were carrying the weight of impossible conversations. Rowan glanced toward Meredith at a red light. She looked exhausted. Not physically tired. Soul tired. Like someone who had spent too long preparing for storms nobody else could see. You do not have to do this alone anymore, he said quietly. Meredith kept her eyes on the window. You keep saying that. Because it is true. She finally looked at him. 4 years ago it was not true. The words landed exactly where they were meant to. Rowan nodded once. He did not defend himself. He had run out of defenses. By the time they arrived at the hospital, rain had started falling lightly against the windshield. The doctor greeted them with the kind smile people wear when they wish circumstances were different. Rowan immediately hated that smile. They sat across from his desk while folders rested neatly between them. Medical terms filled pages Rowan barely understood. Numbers. Charts. Test results. Yet none of it mattered as much as the doctor's expression. Meredith already seemed prepared. Rowan was not. There has been a change, the doctor explained carefully. We need to discuss treatment options immediately. Rowan leaned forward. Will they help? The doctor hesitated. Meredith closed her eyes. That hesitation again. The same hesitation she had described weeks earlier. The room suddenly felt too small. There are possibilities, the doctor said. But we need to move quickly. Rowan held on to one word. Possibilities. Not certainty. Not guarantees. Just possibilities. Yet it was enough. Because possibilities meant hope. After the appointment ended, Meredith walked silently through the hospital corridor. Rowan followed beside her. Neither spoke until they reached the parking lot. Rain tapped softly against the pavement. Finally Meredith stopped walking. I am tired, she admitted. Rowan looked at her. I know. She shook her head. No. You do not. Tears filled her eyes for the first time since he had found her. I am tired of pretending everything is normal. I am tired of smiling when I am scared. I am tired of recording videos for birthdays I might never see. Rowan felt his heart break all over again. Meredith wiped her eyes quickly. I do not want Owen to remember me as someone who was afraid. Rowan stepped closer. Not touching her. Just close enough that she would not feel alone. Then he will remember what is true. Meredith looked up. What is true? Rowan's voice softened. That every person in Cedar Bay loves you. That your son adores you. That you spent 4 years giving him a beautiful life. That you are the strongest person I have ever known. Meredith stared at him. For several seconds she could not speak. Then she laughed through tears. You always did know how to say the right thing too late. Rowan smiled sadly. I am trying to improve my timing. For the first time, genuine smile appeared on Meredith's face. Small, fragile, real. Neither of them noticed the message arriving on Rowan's phone at that exact moment. A message from his office. A message containing information about a trust fund, guardianship paperwork, and one final discovery hidden among Meredith's records. A discovery that would change everything they thought they knew about the future waiting for Owen. 3 days later, the rain was gone. Sunlight spilled across Cedar Bay as though the town itself had decided to believe in hope again. Rowan stood in Meredith's kitchen holding a folder he had read at least 20 times. The final discovery hidden inside her records had not been another tragedy. It had been a possibility. A specialist. An experimental treatment program. Difficult. Expensive. Uncertain. But real. For the first time since learning the truth, Rowan had something stronger than regret. He had a chance to fight for a future. Meredith sat at the table while Owen colored pictures beside her. The little boy was drawing another lighthouse. He always drew lighthouses when he felt safe. Rowan noticed things like that now. He noticed everything. Mom, Owen said suddenly, looking up from his markers. Why does everybody keep acting weird? Meredith exchanged a glance with Rowan. Then she smiled. Because grown-ups are complicated. Owen nodded thoughtfully. That sounds exhausting too. Rowan laughed. Meredith laughed. Even Owen laughed without fully understanding why. The sound filled the room. Warm. Ordinary. Precious. Later that afternoon, after Owen was asleep on the couch, Rowan handed Meredith the folder. She studied the documents quietly. Hope appeared on her face so slowly that it almost hurt to watch. You found this, she whispered. Rowan nodded. We found it. Meredith looked down again. The odds are not guaranteed. Neither is tomorrow. She smiled faintly. You always hated losing arguments. I am not arguing. Rowan sat across from her. I am staying. Meredith's eyes filled with tears. Not because she suddenly trusted him completely. Not because 4 years of pain had disappeared. But because for the first time since the diagnosis she was no longer carrying everything alone. Weeks passed. Then more. Treatment began. Some days were good. Others were difficult. Yet life continued. Rowan learned how Owen liked his pancakes cut into triangles. He learned which bedtime story was requested most often. He learned that fatherhood was not a title. It was 1,000 small choices made every day. One evening, Owen handed Rowan the smooth heart-shaped stone he had found by the harbor. You keep it, he said. Why? Owen shrugged. Because you looked sad when I found it. Rowan stared at the stone resting in his palm. Then he pulled his son into a hug. Months later, on a bright summer morning, Meredith unlocked the closet and opened the box containing all the videos she had recorded. Birthdays, graduations, weddings, goodbyes. She looked at them for a long time before smiling. Then she carried the entire box outside. Rowan was waiting on the porch. Owen chased seagulls across the yard. The future remained uncertain. Life always was. But uncertainty no longer felt like an ending. Meredith rested her head lightly against Rowan's shoulder and watched their son laugh beneath the sunlight. For years she believed the greatest tragedy of her life was being abandoned. She eventually learned something else. Sometimes the greatest miracle is not that someone comes back. It is that they return changed. And sometimes love arrives late, bruised and imperfect, carrying regret in one hand and hope in the other. Yet if it stays, if it learns, if it chooses to remain, it can still become a home. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone you love. Every subscription helps us continue creating emotional mafia romance stories about forgiveness, family, redemption, and the courage to choose love, even after life has broken your heart. And remember, the greatest tragedy is not making a mistake. The greatest tragedy is refusing to correct it while there is still time. Thank you for being part of this journey.